The last time my son looked me in the eye, he told me I was a burden. Not in those exact words. Danny was always too careful for plain speech, but I understood what he was saying. I had spent 37 years learning how to read what wasn't being said out loud, and I sat there in the house I scrubbed clean for nearly 4 decades, and I nodded, like I agreed with him. My name is Margaret Elaine Whitfield. I'm 74 years old, and I need to tell you something I have never told another living soul. Not until now. Back in the day, folks around here on Ridgemont Avenue knew us as the Whitfields, Robert and Margaret, with our boy Daniel, who everybody called Danny, and our youngest Claire. We weren't rich by any measure. Robert was Army, a sergeant. We drove a beat-up Ford pickup and bought our groceries at the Ralphs down the street on Ventura Boulevard. But Lord, we were happy. The real kind. The kind that doesn't need anything added to it to be enough. Robert had a laugh that could fill a whole room. On Friday evenings when he came home from base, I'd have dinner on the stove, and I could hear Danny and Claire screaming from the backyard before the truck had even turned into the driveway. They would run to him like the whole week had been nothing but waiting for that moment. And I'd stand in that kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder and something burning on the stove that I'd already forgotten about. And I would think, this is it. This right here is the whole point of everything. The Army takes from you in ways you don't fully prepare for. Not just the deployments, the not knowing, the sitting by the phone, the learning to read between the lines of every letter he sent home. Robert was careful with his words. He knew I worried, so he kept his voice light, his letters ordinary. I used to hate that. I wanted him to just tell me what was happening over there. Now I understand why he didn't. He was protecting me the only way he could from 6,000 miles away. That was Robert. He was always trying to protect somebody. It was a Tuesday in March of 1987 when my whole life divided itself into before and after. I remember it was Tuesday because that was laundry day. I'd been standing at the counter folding the same shirt over and over with a feeling in my gut I could not name and could not shake. Some people call it intuition. I call it the moment your body understands what your mind isn't ready to hear. The letter said Robert had died in the line of duty, that he was a hero, that the nation was grateful, and then, as though a single sentence could carry the weight of a human life, it said the details of the mission were classified, could not be disclosed, might never be disclosed. I read that letter 3 times in my kitchen on Ridgemont Avenue with Danny's drawing still on the refrigerator and Claire's shoes still by the back door. And then I sat down on the linoleum floor, and I did not get up for a very long time. Danny grew up to be successful, a financial advisor, nice house in Calabasas, 2 cars in the driveway, kids in private school. After I retired, I went to live with him. I thought, this is how it's supposed to work. You pour everything into them for 20 years, and when your body starts to slow down, they're there. That's the agreement, isn't it? That's what family means. I was wrong about that. It was an October evening. I remember because the Santa Ana winds were blowing something fierce, rattling the windows the way they do out here. Danny sat me down in that cold living room and told me, very carefully, very gently, that he and his wife had been thinking and they believed it might be time for me to consider a care facility. Somewhere with professionals, he said, people who are trained for this kind of thing. He used the word "this" and let it hang there, and I understood exactly what this meant. I was this, a problem to be managed by the appropriately credentialed people. I told him I understood. I didn't say it because I agreed. I said it because I could see in his face that the decision had already been made before he walked into that room. He wasn't asking me. He was telling me as gently as he could manage it. And I have always known how to read what isn't being said out loud. I moved into Sunrise Gardens Care Center on a Wednesday, room 14B. It smelled like antiseptic and canned soup. I put Robert's photograph on the windowsill, hung a small cross on the wall, unpacked my 3 boxes, and I said to myself, "Margaret, you have survived worse than this. Keep moving." But here is what nobody tells you about nursing homes. People don't disappear from them by dying. They disappear from them by being forgotten. You can watch it happen in real time during visiting hours. That front door opens, and every single person in the common room looks up. Their whole body goes alert for 1 second, and then the door closes behind somebody else's family, and they look back down, and a little more of them is gone. Danny came the first month, then every other week, then once a month, then only on holidays, and even then it felt like something he was checking off a list. Claire calls more often. God bless her. She's out in Phoenix and she has her own battles to fight. So mostly, I wait. Every Sunday morning, I sit by the phone in my room. I'm not sure anymore what exactly I'm waiting for. I only know that Robert used to call me every Sunday without fail, from wherever he was. He called it his anchor. And somewhere deep in me, after all these years, Sunday mornings still feel like a question waiting to be answered. It was a Tuesday, 2 Octobers after I'd moved in, when Nurse Brenda came to my door wearing an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was somewhere between confused and moved. She told me there was a call at the front desk. A man had asked for me by my full name, Margaret Elaine Whitfield. She said he wouldn't say much except that it was important and that he had known my husband. I stood up so fast I knocked my tea clean off the side table. That feeling was back, the one in my gut I hadn't felt since a Tuesday morning in March of 1987. I picked up that receiver and I said hello, and the man on the other end had a voice rough with age and something else, something that sounded like a weight carried for a very long time. He told me his name was James Calloway. He said he had been a private first class with the 75th Ranger Regiment in March of 1987. And then he said the sentence that I will hear for the rest of my life, every time the room gets quiet. He said, "Your husband saved my life." I pressed my hand flat on that reception desk to keep myself upright. Brenda must have seen my face because she was at my side before I could say a word, her hand on my back, steady as anything. I asked James where he was calling from. He told me Portland, Oregon, and then he said something that cracked me wide open. He said he had been looking for me for a long time. He had been looking since the day he got out of that jungle alive, and he was sorry it took so long to find me. James told me what happened in March of 1987, the parts that had been locked inside that classified file for 37 years. His unit and Robert's were on a rescue mission in a hostile area. That's as specific as he could be even now. During the extraction, James was shot and couldn't move. The rest of the unit had to fall back. Most of them did, but Robert didn't. Robert went back into that jungle for a man he barely knew, and he carried him nearly 2 miles through terrain that doesn't forgive a mistake until he got James to a clearing where a helicopter could reach him. James was airlifted out. Robert was not. And then James told me the last thing Robert said before he sent him up in that helicopter. He told me that Robert looked at him and said, "Tell my wife I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I'm going to miss the baseball game on Saturday. And tell her to keep the roses watered because they're coming in strong this year." The roses. I had a rose garden right along the side fence on Ridgemont Avenue. Robert watered them every Sunday morning after church without being asked. He just did it because he knew I loved them. I stood there in that nursing home hallway and I completely fell apart. Not the polished kind of crying you do in public, the kind that comes up from somewhere 37 years deep and sounds like something finally being set down. 3 days after James called, 2 men arrived at Sunrise Gardens wearing dark suits and carrying identification from the Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs Office. They sat me down in the administrator's office and put a folder on the table with my husband's name printed on it in black ink. I don't think I breathed for a solid minute. They told me James Calloway had spent years filing requests through military records trying to have Robert's final act officially recognized. After the war, James had struggled terribly with what he saw over there, with the weight of surviving when others didn't. He had been living off the grid for years, lost in a way that no one could reach him. His own family had only recently found him and brought him back into the world. And the very first thing he did once he had solid ground under his feet again, the very first thing, was look for me. I've thought about that many times since. The very first thing. One of the men placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of me. It was old, yellowed, the edges gone soft from decades in a records box. My name was on the front in Robert's handwriting. That big, looping handwriting that always took up more space than it needed to because the man just had too much life in him to write small. They told me it was a letter Robert had written the morning before the mission, standard practice before high-risk operations. Soldiers wrote letters in case they didn't come back. Robert's letter had been held in his classified file because the mission itself was sealed. James's testimony, combined with a recent declassification, had finally released it after 37 years. I held that envelope in my hands for a long time before I could bring myself to open it. I kept thinking, he touched this paper. His hands were on this. 37 years ago, on a morning I knew nothing about, my husband sat down somewhere far from home and put his whole heart into these pages for me. The letter was 3 pages. 3 pages in that looping handwriting I would know anywhere on earth. He wrote about Danny first. He said Danny was going to be stubborn. Lord knows he's got his mother's jaw and my stubbornness. God help that boy. But that underneath all of it, he was the softest-hearted kid Robert had ever known. He said, "When he gets hard on you, Margaret, remind him who taught him to be tender. You did. Don't let him forget that." He wrote about Claire's giggle. He said it was the sound he heard when things got dark out there, and it was the sound that kept him putting one foot in front of the other. He said, "Tell her she's been saving me from the other side of the world without knowing it." And then he wrote about me. He said, "You have always been the bravest person I know, Margaret. Not because you don't feel fear, but because you feel it completely, all the way through, and you keep going anyway. Whatever happens out there, know that every good thing I ever did was possible because you made me believe I was capable of good things. You are the reason I know how to love. You taught me that, and I'm going to carry it into whatever comes next. The VA men had asked to contact Danny. I was told later that the call came to his office in the middle of a meeting, and he walked out mid-sentence, got in his car, and drove to Sunrise Gardens so fast he ran 2 red lights on Ventura Boulevard. I don't know why that detail moved me as much as it did, but it did. He came into my room and he looked at me, really looked at me, in a way he hadn't in years. Not past me, not at the floor, not at his phone, at me. The letter was still in my lap. I didn't say a word. I just held it out to him. I watched my son read his father's words, and I watched 37 years of grief that he had never had the language for travel across his face, like a storm moving through. He had been 9 years old when Robert died. 9 years old. He never had the chance to understand who his father was as a man, only who he was as a memory. And memories go soft around the edges over time. He cried on the second page, not quietly, the way men cry when they have been holding it so long that when it finally comes out, it sounds almost like something else entirely. And when he finished the third page, he sat there with the letter pressed flat against his chest, and he didn't move for a long time. Then he looked up at me and he said he didn't know. He said he didn't know, not just about his father, but about me, about what I had carried, about what it had cost. He said he had never asked, and the way he said it, I understood that he was not making an excuse. He was making an accounting, a reckoning with himself. He told me he wanted to take me home, that he would set everything up right, take whatever time it needed, but he wanted me to come home. I looked at my son for a long while without answering. I've lived long enough to know that words are the easiest part. It's the days that come after the words that tell you what a person actually means. So I told him, let's start with Sunday. Come here this Sunday and we'll have dinner together. Right here in this room with the bad lighting and the canned soup smell, and we'll see where we go from there. He nodded, and then he hugged me the way he used to when he was 9 years old and I was the whole world to him. I held on. I won't pretend I didn't. 2 weeks later, Danny helped me set up a video call with James Calloway. I want you to appreciate how strange and wonderful that sentence is. That I was sitting in a nursing home in Los Angeles looking at the face of the man my husband died saving through a screen smaller than a dinner plate. Robert would not have believed it. He barely trusted the microwave. James was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that settles into a person when they've carried heavy things for a very long time, but his eyes were full of life. Full of something that looked a lot like gratitude finally being able to go somewhere. He had grandchildren, 3 of them. He showed me a photograph on his phone, holding it up to the camera the way people do when they're not quite sure how any of this technology works, and I loved him for it immediately. He told me he had named his youngest son Robert. He said it with his chin slightly down, a little uncertain, like he was afraid I might find it presumptuous. I pressed both hands over my mouth and looked at the ceiling for a good 30 seconds. I'm not ashamed of it. When I could speak again, I told him it was more than all right. It was the finest thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me things about Robert I had never known. How Robert used to hum old country songs on long marches when he thought nobody was listening. How he always shared his rations with whoever seemed to need them most. How the younger soldiers in the unit called him Coach because he had this way of seeing the best in a person and pulling it out of them, whether they wanted him to or not. Coach, Lord, that was my Robert, right down to the bone. You know what nobody tells you about getting old? It's not the joints or the slow mornings. It's the waiting. You spend so much of the last chapter of your life waiting for the visit, for the call, for the door to open and be the right person coming through it. I'm not waiting the same way anymore. I think about Robert every single day. I think about what he did in that jungle in the dark, when everything in him must have been screaming to fall back and save himself. He didn't. He went back for a man he barely knew, because going back was simply who Robert was. And for 37 years, I kept the roses watered, and I kept the faith, and I raised his children, and I never told a soul what it cost me. Because that's what love looks like from the inside. It looks like endurance. It looks like showing up quietly without applause, because it needs to be done, and you are the one who can do it. Danny comes every Sunday now. 2 weeks ago, he brought the grandchildren. They climbed all over this old armchair and showed me things on their little phones and talked so fast and so much that I couldn't follow half of it, and I didn't care even a little bit. I thought my heart might burst clean out of my chest from the ordinary fullness of it. And James Robert Calloway up in Portland, Oregon, sends me a card every single month. Last one had a photograph of his grandson Robert tucked inside. 3 years old, round-cheeked, grinning so hard his eyes disappeared. I put it right next to Robert's photograph on the windowsill. It felt right. It felt like exactly where it belonged. At my age, you start to understand something they don't teach you anywhere. That love is not a feeling, it's a practice. It's the thing you do in the dark when no one is watching, when there's no guarantee it will ever be recognized or returned. It's going back. It's staying. It's watering the roses even when you don't know if spring is coming. Robert knew that better than anyone I have ever met, and because of him, because of one letter held in a government file for 37 years, because of one phone call from an old soldier in Oregon who refused to let a debt of gratitude die unspoken, my son is learning it too. It is never too late for that, not for any of us. That is the one thing I know for certain. That's the whole story, and it's mine. If my story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who still believes family should never be forgotten. Because right now, somewhere out there, there is someone sitting beside a window on a Sunday morning, waiting for a door to open. Maybe your share is the thing that reaches them today. And if you would like to hear another story about family and regret and second chances, click the video on your screen right now. There's always another story worth telling, and I will be right here to tell it.